Would the US sovereign wealth fund be able to buy TikTok and make sure that the Gen Zers don't lose their TikTok? Or maybe could Elon Musk invest in the fund and buy TikTok?
Remember that if you're in favor of the US government owning these assets, right, what that means is at some point, somebody whose political views you don't like are going to be controlling conversation on those assets.
Gary, this next thing number 4, has you wondering if we can get Nancy Pelosi to manage our fund. And if so, Gary, you said you would be all in, and I would be as well. Thing number 4, Gary, the U.S. Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Yeah, so thank you for clarifying, Rob. Deep Knowledge Investing does not want Nancy Pelosi managing our funds, but there is talk about a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. I have very mixed feelings about this. On the positive side, there are examples of sovereign wealth funds that have done a great job for their citizens. In particular, Norway has done a great job with it. Singapore has, Dubai, their Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. What they've done is they've taken national assets, typically energy-related assets, and used them to create a sovereign wealth fund. Now, the thing that I like about it is I've been complaining for years that the US spends too much and takes on too much debt. Anything that has us investing instead of spending, you know what? That's a step in the right direction. The problem with this is those funds will be managed in a political way. And I guarantee you, if you're listening to this, you will be unhappy with something that's happening. So, for instance, if you're listening to this show right now, realize that President Trump and his team are going to be investing in carbon-based energy, and you might not like that. And you might say, wait a minute, I don't like the way you're investing. Well, at some point, the left is going to take over Congress and the White House again, right? Nothing lasts forever. And when that happens, you better assume that that future administration will be using gigantic US positions in companies to compel all kinds of uneconomic things like green energy or more DEI practices. And they'll say, hey, listen, we've got $1 trillion wealth fund, and, we own 20% of your company, and we want your board of advisors and your executive suite to match our DEI goals. And so there are a bunch of people listening to this show right now who are going to say, wait a minute, we don't want that. That's not in our interest. So the issue I have with a sovereign wealth fund, Rob, is whatever we're doing is going to be used for political ends and not economic ends. And I don't know that that goes well for the rest of the country. At a minimum, it's a guarantee that at any particular time, half the country is unhappy with it, and our companies are going to be pushed around by Washington every 4 to 8 years. They're going to be told, we own a bunch of your companies, so pursue these policies. And then 4 years later, nope, we want these policies, something different. And I don't think that ends well.
Gary, I think the one thing that pops into my head and the most important question out of everything there is, would the U.S. sovereign wealth fund be able to buy TikTok and make sure that the Gen Zers don't lose their TikTok? Or maybe could Elon Musk invest in the fund and buy TikTok?
Well, so, listen, I can't speak for Elon Musk. He does seem a little busy these days. And I believe he said he doesn't want to buy TikTok. But the fact is, I think the Trump administration is going to make it clear to China that they need to divest TikTok. In fairness, the prior administration put pressure on China as well. I think this is an area where both Democrats and Republicans agree that the Chinese government having control of what our young people are seeing and watching and the way they're collecting data on American citizens is not in our best interest. So I do think there is going to be some sort of forced divestment of the US assets of TikTok. Elon Musk certainly, listen, he owns Twitter. And what we found out last week, now it's X. What we found out last week is that, he cut all of the spending, and people said, he's going to run the company into the ground. They're going to go bankrupt. Not only did that not happen, EBITDA, earnings before interest, depreciation, taxes, amortization, has actually grown, and companies are starting to come back and advertise on the platform, and he's actually made it more profitable. Good for him. So clearly he's capable of running it. If the Trump administration does start a sovereign wealth fund, they definitely could invest in TikTok. Now, that sounds like a great solution, but I'm just going to point out to everybody, stop and think for a minute. Over the last 4 to 8 years, conservatives have complained bitterly that they've felt like social media platforms like Twitter, when it was owned by, Jack Dorsey and then publicly owned, or sorry, run by Jack Dorsey and publicly owned, and Facebook, like all of these social media platforms, the perception was that they were biased toward the left and that they restricted the reach of conservative accounts. They banned people, typically conservatives, and conservatives felt like there was an imbalance, that they were treated differently. So for everybody saying, wait a minute, this is great, the US could buy TikTok, we'll own it in a sovereign wealth fund. If you're on the left, remember, it will be President Trump's people who will be influencing policy there. You might not like that. Now, for, Team MAGA, who's saying, yes, this is great, President Trump and his team and the MAGA team are going to be able to have influence over social media discussion, and our views will be represented. Well, President Trump has a 4-year term, not a 40-year term. At some point, the left will take over and they will be controlling it. And so, just remember that if you're in favor of the US government owning these assets, right, what that means is at some point, somebody whose political views you don't like are going to be controlling conversation on those assets. And so you might be happy now, but you'll be unhappy in 4 years or 8 years, and vice versa if you're on the other side of the argument. Maybe this is a good time to think about, do we really want the United States in the business of managing policy for private companies or public companies? Do we want the United States running its own hedge fund? Or maybe they should just cut spending and let the American people do their own investing. That's really our position on it, and that's what we think would be best.